Now may I request Dr. Amjad Waheed to please give his presentation. Dr. Amjad Waheed is the Chief Executive Officer of NBP Fund Management Limited. Please give a big round of applause for Dr. Amjad Waheed.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thankful to the Management Association of Pakistan and thankful to Mr. Talib Karim for giving me the opportunity to talk about Pakistan's economy. I think for leaders it's important to understand the economic environment that they are in so they can make the right decisions. So my presentation will be two parts. First, how did we reach this stage where we are? A difficult stage that we are in. What made us reach this stage? And the second part is how to get out of it. What needs to be done. So, yes, so what I have done is I've done a comparison of Pakistan with other countries, one way of sort of analyzing, what we have done right or what we have done wrong. I have taken the universe as countries with a population of over 1 million and GDP of over 10 billion. Pakistan's population is 220 million and GDP of over $300 billion. So there are 149 countries that basically qualify. And so if you look at the Human Development Index, to start with, Pakistan is 122 out of these 149 countries. And if you look at life expectancy, it's 66 years. Expected years of schooling, this is, I think, a very, very critical number. And it's only 9 years of schooling. So a child here today, on average, only goes to school for 9 years. And if you look at India and Bangladesh, it is 12 years. So we are ranked 145 out of 149 countries in terms of expected years of schooling. And the 4 countries that are below us are Sudan, Mali, Chad, and Niger. So this is how we stand in terms of education. And even in terms of adult literacy rate, the countries below us are Yemen and Mauritania, Ethiopia, Senegal. So not the type of company that would like to keep. Again, the importance of education, one of the studies shows that for every 1 year of schooling, for the average population, the GDP goes up by about 13%. So the average year of schooling in Pakistan right now is about 5 years. So if we can increase this average year of schooling to 6 years, we can add $50 billion to Pakistan economy. And then if we can add another year, so the average year of schooling for the population becomes 7 years, that adds another $50 billion to the economy. So this is the value of education, something that we have sort of ignored. Primary school enrollment numbers, on the same page, yeah, are okay, 95%. But secondary school, there's a major drop. So after class 5, we see a substantial drop in the enrollment because A, we do not have enough secondary schools in the country, and B, the distance increases, and so it becomes difficult for poor parents to send their children to school. So in Pakistan, only 45% of children make to secondary schools versus 75% in Bangladesh and 78% in India. And again, in terms of higher education, university or degree college, only 1 in 8 Pakistanis make to the university or a high degree school. If you look at India, 1 in 3 makes it to the university or high degree. If you look at Bangladesh, 1 in 4. And in Pakistan, it's 1 out of 8. So in terms of both secondary and post-secondary education, we are way behind India and Bangladesh. The key reasons for that is that A, we have not spent enough on education, and human and physical infrastructure in total, Whether you talk about education or healthcare or clean drinking water or roads or dams, we have not spent enough. And B, the governance issue, whatever we have spent, we have not spent basically efficiently. So these have been the two issues that we have faced. So if you want the economy to grow, there are certain inputs that are required for the economy to grow. And that basically is a productive workforce, which means a healthy workforce, educated workforce, skilled workforce, population planning, science and technology, investment in agriculture, industry, infrastructure, political stability, law and order, and a dominant private sector. These are the key ingredients. If they are right, your economy is going to grow. And we have been lagging in most of them, and therefore our economy has not grown as as much as, for example, what we call the Asian tigers, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, or even if you compare it with India and Bangladesh. Next, if you look at the governance indicators, which is a World Bank basically report, if you just look at two of them, political stability and absence of violence, Pakistan is 12th out of 149 countries, and the countries below us are Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Mali, Ethiopia, Sudan, Myanmar, Nigeria, and Syria. So these are the only countries in the world which are below in terms of political stability and absence of violence. One other number, control of corruption. We are 43 out of 149 countries, but surprisingly, Bangladesh is worse than us. It is 33 from the bottom. So Bangladesh actually is rated more corrupt than Pakistan, but still it has done a lot better. It shows that corruption is obviously important to control, but other factors which I just mentioned in terms of education, healthcare, etc., are equally important. If you look at education spending, we have spent about 1.9% of GDP on average over the last 22 years. Bangladesh has spent slightly better, 2.1%, and India has spent 2.9% of GDP on education. So although Bangladesh has spent about the same money on education as us, if you look at their secondary school enrollment is 75%, ours is 45%. So they've used that money better. India has spent about 3% of GDP on education. So over the last 22 years, if Pakistan had also invested about 3% of GDP on education like India and many other countries, we would have spent an extra $44 billion on education. And it would have obviously brought a huge change in the overall education and skill level of the country. Similarly, if you look at healthcare, Pakistan has spent only 0.7% of GDP on education over the last 22 years. Bangladesh has spent about 4 times that much, 2.5% of GDP. India has spent twice versus Pakistan on healthcare. So as a percentage of economy over the last 22 years, Pakistan has spent $25 billion less on healthcare versus India, and $78 billion less versus Bangladesh, if you just look at the percentage of economy. Next is science and technology. The government only spent 0.03% of the budget, of the GDP on science and technology. If you look at Bangladesh, they spend 0.25, which means they spend 8 times as much on science and technology as we do. If you look at India, they spend 0.16% of the GDP, which is about 5 times more than what we do. So the percentage of the economy over the last 13 years, Pakistan has spent $4.3 billion less on science and technology versus India, and $9.5 billion less than Bangladesh. Agriculture spending, again, very critical. And if you look at here, Pakistan has spent only 0.14% of GDP on agriculture per year over the last 22 years. Bangladesh has spent 1%. So it has spent about 7 times more on agriculture than us. India has spent 1.5% of GDP every year. So it has spent 10 times more on agriculture than us. And that's why you see the productivity difference. If you just cross the border in Punjab, the agriculture productivity goes, doubles or triples. So the outcome of that, you can see just, in one indicator, cotton production, where we and Bangladesh and India were about the same in 2000, but today we are down from about 10 million to 7 million, and India is up from 10 million to 35 million, million bales, obviously. So again, the fact that we have not spent on human and physical infrastructure, not spent enough on agriculture infrastructure, our economy has not grown, and that has put us into trouble. If you look at industrial contribution, Again, you see that we have spent average 19, industry is 19% of GDP in Pakistan. In Bangladesh, it's 27% of GDP. In India, it's 28% of GDP. So, especially if you look at Bangladesh, in 2000, industry was 22% of their GDP. Today, it is 33% of GDP. Our GDP was 18% in 2000. It's 19% today. So it has not grown that much. And again, the reason industry has not grown, I think too many taxes, the law and order situation. We have kept our currency overvalued most of the time, which has encouraged imports. So we know all, the typical reasons, too much taxes. If you look at exports as a percentage of GDP, Pakistan's exports has averaged about 12% of GDP, Bangladesh 15, and India 20. So if you look at this ratio, exports as a percentage of GDP, countries that are below us in the world are Kenya, Nigeria, Cuba, Gambia, Haiti, Ethiopia, Nepal, Yemen, Burundi, Afghanistan, and Sudan. So these are the only countries in the world where the export to GDP ratio is less than what it is in Pakistan. So these have been very critical factors. Population growth. Our population has grown at 2.7% per year. If you look at India and Bangladesh, the population has grown by 1.8% per year over the last 50 years. So if our population had also grown by the same rate as India and Bangladesh, our population would be 15 crore rather than 23 crore. So 8 crore less people to educate, to feed, to give jobs. So I think this has also been a key factor. And if our population had been 15 crore, our per capita income would be 58% higher, just by the fact that we would have a lower population. So this is something that unfortunately we have seen a lot of Muslim countries focusing on population growth, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh. Unfortunately, we have not. If you look at military spending, we have spent 3.7% of GDP on military on average over the last 22 years. Bangladesh has spent 1.2% of GDP. So it has spent about 1/3 on military versus us. And India has spent 2.6% of GDP on military. Again, it has spent 50% less than what we have spent on the military. So as a percentage of economy over the last 22 years, Pakistan has spent $37 billion more on military versus India, and $97 billion more on military versus Bangladesh. And again, this is one number where we come out good. We are 11 out of 149 countries in terms of military spending. Again, if you see in 2000, we were spending $3 billion on military and India was spending $14 billion. Today we are spending $11 billion, India is spending $77 billion. So the difference has actually increased. At that time in 2000, India was spending about 5 times more on military than us, and today it is spending about 7 times more than us. And the reason for that is not that they actually have actually allocated more of their budget to the military. The reason for that is that their economy has grown faster than us. So the right way to grow the military is to grow your economy. The wrong way to grow the military is to allocate a higher percentage of the budget or higher percentage of the GDP to the military. Cost of bureaucracy, the state-owned enterprises, just the debt of state-owned enterprises is now in excess of $7 billion. And the government provides 1.3 trillion rupees per year in subsidies and grants to state-owned enterprises. And that's like $4.6 billion per year, which the government is providing as subsidy to state-owned enterprises. And then we go to IMF begging for $1 billion. Again, one more interesting fact, we have a tendency in Pakistan to allocate land to government officials. And a couple of years ago, the Islamabad High Court took notice of that. Government officials and judges were given land in various sectors of Islamabad. And the Chief Justice of the Islamabad High Court basically inquired from CDA, what is the market value of this land? that has been given to these government officials. And CDA came back saying it's 1 trillion rupees, which is like $3.6 billion. So just in 1 year, the land that was allocated to government officials was worth $3.6 billion. Okay, and this we are only talking about the federal government. We are not even talking about the provincial government here. One more worry that we have, that the actuarial deficit. Pakistan, government employees' pensions are not funded. And if you look at that liability, that is close to 25 trillion rupees, which is about $91 billion. So most countries basically fund government officials, just like in corporates, the corporates fund, 10% of my salary gets deducted, 10% company puts in, 20% goes to my pension, and after that, the company has no responsibility. In case of Pakistan government, they do not fund the pension liabilities. And this number is somewhere around $91 billion, which is 28% of our GDP. So all these factors, they've actually put us in a very difficult situation. If you look at total government revenue as a percentage of economy, in Pakistan, it has averaged 14%, in Bangladesh 10%, in India 19%. So Bangladesh has spent less, has actually collected less in tax as a percentage of GDP versus Pakistan, but still they are doing better because they have allocated those resources in a better way. So federal government tax collection for all three countries is about 10%, but in India, the provinces do a much better job of collecting taxes, whereas in Pakistan, provinces collect very little in taxes. So the result of all this, that I've covered basically is that if you look at India and Bangladesh, their per capita income is today about 50% higher than us. So an average Indian or an average Bangladeshi earns 50% more than what we earn. And I think the reason for that I've covered in the previous slides. One more factor in terms of debt to GDP ratio, from 63%, our debt has now grown to about 90% of GDP. And if you look at debt servicing, it's eating away about 52% of tax revenues, this number. And this again is because as the debt servicing is going up, we are reducing our development spending. So if you look at just one number, development spending as a percentage of the budget, Pakistani government spends 23%, Bangladesh 63%, and India 38%. So if the government will not spend enough on development, obviously then government development spending has a multiplier impact on the private sector as well. So if the government continues to reduce its development spending, I think it will further slow down our economy. So I'll take another 7 minutes to talk about the way forward now. So first of all, I think some of the strategic thinking that needs to go to our, our rulers is, first of all, we need to avoid default at all costs. So whatever IMF conditions, no matter how tough they are, we need to avoid it, because once you go into default, things get really bad. I've studied countries that have defaulted, high inflation, high interest rates, massive currency devaluation, increase in poverty, increase in unemployment, increase in lawlessness. So that's not where we want to go. So although IMF conditions are tough, I think we should go with them, and we should remain within the IMF program. The second thing is we need a mindset change where we need to move from geopolitics to geoeconomics. For too long, I think we have survived on geopolitics, but I think the times have changed. We need to focus on the economy. The third thing is, definition of national security. I think for too long, we have basically defined national security as military security. And I think we need to change our mindset where national security is a lot more than military security. It includes food security, human security, economic security, energy security, water security, climate security, and a common man security. So we need to look at all of these issues in a holistic manner and allocate our resources accordingly. We need to reduce our current account deficit, and the best way of doing it is to move to a market-driven exchange rate, which basically promotes exports, discourages imports, and improves reserves. So for too long, we have kept our currency overvalued. If you look at China or what we call the Asian tigers like Malaysia, Indonesia, they have always kept their currency undervalued. We have always mostly kept our currency overvalued, and that has basically brought in too much of imports in Pakistan and has discouraged exports and has eaten away our reserves. Second, we need to reduce the fiscal deficit. And first of all, we need to tax all sources of income, whether it is agriculture, whether it is real estate, whether it is services, and at the same rate. And important is that we do not further burden the corporate sector. Because what we have been seeing in the last few years, that as the government has got into a difficult situation, the taxes are increasing on the corporate sector. And corporate sector basically creates jobs, it creates exports, and it pays a lot of taxes. But if you're going to tax corporate sector too heavily, it will just slow down. And ultimately, government tax revenues are also going to slow down. So although overall we want to broaden the tax base, we need to be careful not to tax corporates further than they're already being taxed. And the same thing goes for a common man. I think already a common man is facing a lot of burden. And it's important that the government reduces its entire budget, whether it's the federal government or the provincial government or government departments. The entire budget has to be slashed by 30% straight away. That's the only way. We cannot continue to tax. There are limitations to that. We need to cut our expenditure. Our expenditure is way ahead versus if you compare it with Bangladesh. Next important thing is that we need to privatize state-owned enterprises. We have already talked that they're costing the government $4.6 billion in subsidies and grants every year, and we need to use this money to pay off the debt. The government needs to learn within its means. Excessive government borrowing has crowded out the private sector. They cannot borrow. And so the more productive sector, which is the private sector, has been crowded out because of excessive government borrowing from the banks. Government should auction state land owned by it and its departments and use those proceeds to reduce the debt. And no state land should be allocated to government officials, politicians, judges, or government departments. State land should only be auctioned and the money used to reduce the government debt. We need to, this was a British legacy to give state land to officials. I think we need to get away with this. Important in terms of governance, I think we need to go to a public-private or partnership. I'll sort of skip some of this in the interest of time. Important thing is, I think, to basically delegate financial and administrative powers to the local government. I think this was done in India and Bangladesh about 50 years ago, and we are way behind. We need to delegate to the local level because governance is best closer to home. I think I'll and skip some of these points, but I think we already have a Pakistan National Security Committee. Its mandate has to be enhanced, where I think now that we say national security is a lot more than military security, all those matters need to be discussed at the National Security Committee level. And then I think finally we need to have a conducive business environment, public-private partnerships, speedy utilization of natural resources, speedy completion of special economic zones. And then I've already talked about human security. We need to increase our spending on education, healthcare, wherever there are human interests. And finally, I think in difficult times, we need to increase our social net for the poor. I think it's very important the way inflation is growing, that the government focuses on providing food stamps to the poor, where they can go and buy at least their basic food necessities. Thank you very much.